From 1967 to 1979, there would be 5 murders in Dundee in Scotland. 2 would be committed by Robert Mone, who would eventually be sentenced to life in 1977. In 1979, his father Sonny, who was proud of Robert's achievements with murdering 2 people, wanted to go on better and murder 3 people. He managed to achieve that. This is the case of Robert and Sonny Mone. Nanette Hanson was born in 1941 in Bradford, Yorkshire. She was the daughter of George, a police superintendent, and Mary Hall. She grew up in a disciplined household shaped by her father's career. In May 1967, she married a man named Guy Hanson in Bradford. The couple moved to Dundee, where Nanette got a job teaching at St John's Roman Catholic School. On 1st of November 1967, Robert Mone went AWOL from his army unit. He went on a drinking bender for days, picked up a shotgun he bought from someone in London and went up to Dundee, to his old haunts in Dundee, and walked purposely through St John's School gates, which was a school that he'd been expelled from a few years before, and ended up going to a reform school. And this ended up giving him a chip on his shoulder. Dressed in his Gordon Highlanders uniform and was carrying a long object wrapped in brown paper. No one stopped him to ask what he was doing. On that day at 2:15, 26-year-old Nanette Hanson was starting a needlework lesson with 11 third-year pupils whose age ranged from 14 to 15. And now I had to check this at the time, because in England, third year means 14 to 15, but there's discrepancies between different rules. In England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So third year would be 14 to 15 in Scotland, whereas in England it would be 13 to 14. Entered the needlework class wearing his uniform and armed with a shotgun. The girls started giggling when they first saw him. Just thought he was some silly man playing a bit of a prank. So when he ripped the paper open and showed the gun to the girls, they started to giggle until he asked them to start barricading the door. And they didn't at that point they realised it wasn't a prank, and some of them started to cry. They and their teacher Nanette Hanson was held captive for 2 hours. Sources say 90 minutes, some say 2 hours, but I'm going to round it up for 2 hours. And ammunition from his pockets along the front of the desk. He told the girls that he was going to blow their heads off before asking their ages. And when he got to Nanette Hanson, she mentioned she was 26, and he said, "Oh, you're a pensioner." And he was, I don't know that I mentioned his age, he was 19 at the time, so when you're 19, I suppose 26 does seem old. After he said, "You're just a pensioner," to her, he snatched her glasses and then trampled them on the floor. When any of the girls sobbed too loudly, he'd put a gun to their head and threatened to shoot them. He ordered them into a small changing room and told them he'd come to get revenge for his expulsion a few years before, particularly against one of the Marist brothers. I think that's how you pronounce it. He fired several rounds at the classroom door. Miss Hanson or Mrs. Hanson tried to get the girls to stop crying. Margaret Christie, who was the domestic science teacher, heard some of the strange noises and came to investigate. She and another needlework teacher saw that the window was covered with material, and she saw the material move away and Mrs. Hanson walking towards them. And gunfire broke the top of the door, covering the pair with glass, and with that they fled to raise the alarm. The police turned up within minutes, and the remaining pupils were evacuated. The police attended with riot shields and made their way up to the corridor. The police that were there were Detective Superintendent Donald Robertson, head of CID, and Detective Chief Inspector Jim Melville, and Sergeant George McLaren. They attempted to negotiate with Mone, but they were met with gunfire. A 14-year-old was at the door with a gun to her head. He said she would be killed if they forced entry. So as part of the negotiations, police brought Mone's grandmother to the door. Unsuccessfully, she was brought there to try and get him to stop, and she was unsuccessful with that. 3 of the girls were ordered into the classroom. With that, he kissed one of them and sexually assaulted the other two. He released a 15-year-old girl, instructing her not to talk to the people on the ground floor. At that point, the police started to discuss using tear gas. Marion Young was born in 1949 and was a student nurse in 1967. He had a crush on her. He met her 4 years prior at a youth club. When he knew she was coming, he washed his face and his hair, anticipating her arrival, because that suggested he was probably quite excited to see his crush again. When she arrived, he said with a smile, "You thought you were a brave little girl. How did you know I wouldn't blow your head off?" But Marion had no training in negotiation. She just, using her wits, started to call him Bobby. And I think, reading between the lines, she was probably trying to flirt with him a bit, just trying to get his trust. To him that she knew he'd never do that, and she sort of was laughing with him. She managed, well, both Nanette and Marion managed to persuade Mone to release the girls, but he refused to release Mrs. Hanson. With that, he became more irrational. He had some sandwiches and gave one to Marion, so I think he was obviously giving her preferential treatment because she was still his crush, and he probably still had a crush on her. And then he asked Mrs. Manson for a cigarette. When he was having the cigarette, he put the shotgun down, and Marion started to expect it. He threw her on the floor and grabbed it back, so he obviously wasn't sort of playing her game the way she wanted him to play it. So at the scene at that time, got Nanette's husband to the scene, Mrs. Hanson's husband. But Mone started aiming the gun at different points of the room, and he was asking the women if they thought he was capable of killing anyone. He pulled the trigger several times, but it had a faulty mechanism on it, so it didn't fire. So he obviously hadn't tested the gun before he bought it and took it up to Scotland from London. It was All Saints' Day on this day as well, and one of the things he did was he pointed the gun to Mrs. Hanson and asked her if she wanted to be a saint and squeezed the trigger, and it didn't fire. Then he did it to Marion. He'd obviously got over his crush on her by that stage, and the same thing happened. With that, he started to get angry with the gun and aimed it at the door, and it fired. Hanson to shut the blinds, and with that he shot her in the back. So that time again the gun worked. She was obviously critically injured at that point, and Marion started pleading. She was a student nurse, so she could do so much to help. She was medically trained, which stopped pleading with Robert Mone to let Mrs. Hanson go, so she could go to hospital. And with that, Mone said, "Oh, well, you can do what you want," and he was arrested. So Mrs. Hanson was taken to the Dundee Royal Infirmary, where she died of her injuries. The trial commenced on the 23rd of January 1968, and Robert Mone was found to be suffering from schizophrenia, which he's developed over 2 years. Lord Thompson said he was to be detained without limit of time in the State Mental Hospital in Carstairs. And Robert Mone responded to him by smiling at him and muttering, "Good for you." On March the 14th, 1968, Marion Young was awarded the George Medal by Queen Elizabeth II at Buckingham Palace, recognised for attempting to disarm and subdue the attacker after Mrs. Hanson was shot. 2 months later, she married a soldier who had served in Germany just like Robert Mone had done, and Nanette Hanson was posthumously awarded the Albert Medal. 1st of November, since that teaching at St. John's Catholic School in Dundee, a special mass has been said for Nanette, who was described by Brother Bede at her funeral as a heroine, a martyr who died for these children. 30th of November 1976. So by this stage, it had embarked on a 4-year relationship with fellow inmate Thomas McCulloch. So Thomas was in the mental facility for shooting and wounding 2 employees in a restaurant because there wasn't enough butter for his bread roll, which seems like a reasonable reason to shoot somebody. So they started this relationship and then decided to hatch a plan of how to escape from the mental hospital. They did this by stealing disguises and tools from the drama department, and they assembled a rope ladder, weapons, fake ID and cash into a safe cupboard where Neil McClellan, who was their supervisor, was speaking to another patient. That patient was Ian Simpson, who was a double killer who had been sent there 14 years earlier. Mone and McCulloch, armed with paint stripper, threw it in Simpson's face. Simpson put up a fight. With that, McCulloch attacked Simpson from the back with an axe. McClellan, the supervisor, struggling from the effects of paint stripper, also stabbed by McCulloch with a knife and a cleaver. They also cut phone wires so nobody could ring for help. After they'd attacked these two and left them for dead, started to put on their disguises. And then McCulloch said that he was returning to the cupboard to get keys to the drama room, which was a lie. Basically, he went back to finish them off both Simpson and McClellan with an axe, and sliced off Simpson's ears like a trophy, which sounds absolutely horrific. I mean, the whole thing sounds horrific, but, you know. Mone lay down on a main road to look like an accident victim. McCulloch was wearing a nurse's hat and false beard and moustache and waved a torch to signal a car to stop. So the driver got out, who was called Robert McCulloch, to try and offer assistance. But then a passing police car offered to assist. So with that, Robert McCallum just went on his merry way and left them to it. The police officers were attacked by Mone and McCulloch using an axe and a meat cleaver. PC John Gillis survived the attack. PC George Taylor didn't, and he was only 27 years when he died. Taylor was born in 1949 in Carstairs Junction, Lanarkshire, Scotland. He grew up in the local community and later joined the police force, serving with Strathclyde Police. He was known as a dedicated officer, respected by colleagues and loved by his family. So once they'd attacked the policeman, they stole the Panda car, and hospital authorities, for some reason, took 40 minutes to raise the alarm. So this is 1967, so security wasn't what it is now. There's no CCTV. They probably didn't have any security staff, I would guess. So it probably took them a while to realise what had happened. Robert Mone and Thomas McCulloch were eventually captured near Carlisle in northern England. They'd changed to an Austin, which I think they must have stolen, after a high-speed chase down the A74. 4 Scottish police vehicles were joined by reinforcements from Cumbria Constabulary. So once they knew that these people had escaped, they were all guns blazing to try and catch them. They forced the fugitives onto a slip road of the M6 motorway where they crashed. They tried to seize a car that stopped at the crash before being restrained by police. So that's McCulloch and Mone tried to seize a car that had stopped at the crash. So they're going to try and steal another one and drive away. And with that, they were arrested by the police before they got to that point. 3 of those police were awarded the Queen's Gallantry Medal. In early 1977, Mone pleaded guilty to the murder of PC George Taylor, McCulloch to all 3 murders. They were imprisoned for life with a recommendation from Lord Dunpark that they never be released. They were sentenced on the 31st of March in 1977. 2 years later, Sonny Mone, who was Robert Mone's father, was going around Dundee in the pubs. I mean, it's a piece of work, basically. He was a violent man who liked to drink. His wife had left Robert and I think his daughter with Sonny and ran away when Robert was about 2 years old or something, I think. And I assume that was to do with violence. He was probably abusing her at home and she ran away from the situation. So Sonny craved fame and was determined to go one better than his convicted murderer son. So he used to call him the Carstairs Killer and how proud he was of him. And also Sonny had a couple of tattoos. In his IHS stood for in his service, which was alluding to the devil. So in the devil's service. And he also had TNT on his penis, which he used to get out quite regularly, apparently, and show to people. Charming individual. On the 29th of December, a missing person report was raised for 78-year-old Agnes Robertson Waugh on the 29th of December. Now, she was the half-aunt, basically Sonny's father's sister, half-sister. She went missing. And then on the 4th of January, a detective went to the rear of the only flat where no one seemed home. So he was looking through all the flats, and the only one where no one was present was the flat at the rear. So he forced open the living room window and pulled back curtains. Lifeless arm and handling from a bed recess. Him and his colleague burst in, and on the bed was the body of Catherine Millar, 29, stocking and electric flex knotted around her neck. In armchairs either side were Jane Simpson, 70, and Agnes Waugh. They had stockings tied tightly around their necks and knotted several times. They were bound to the chairs by plastic bags tied to wrists and ankles. They had both been severely beaten about the face, and it was Jane's flat this occurred in. Agnes's flat was at the other end of the corridor. What they suspect happened was that the Jane Simpson, Catherine Miller, they think they were killed first, and then they suspect Sonny had gone to the other flat and either murdered her there or brought. I think they think he murdered her at her flat. That's his aunt, half aunt, dragged her to where the other two bodies lay. So it wasn't immediately apparent to the police who the young woman was. Her husband of less than 2 weeks appeared. He had reported her missing after she vanished on the 29th of December, a week after their wedding. And it was the first time that she had gone out without him since they got married. She liked to drink herself, and he suspected she'd gone out drinking rather than going shopping, which she said she was going to do. And John Miller identified the young woman as his wife. Agnes Waugh was well known throughout the area. She was looked in on by other residents who were alarmed to find her flat door and the gas fire in the living room on full, but with no Agnes anywhere. It was bitterly cold and there was snow on the ground. Due to her age, she was quite infirm, and at first it was thought she may have wandered off and had an accident. But a check of local hospitals couldn't find her, and she was unlikely to have wandered very far away. The night of the murder, Son had gone to a pub with a friend known as Billy Rebel. Real name, Stuart Hutton, was 22, which was about 30 years younger than Sonny, so a bit of an age gap relationship there. But I suppose when people are all drinking together, don't really care about things like that. They got us takeaway, or carry out as they call them in Scotland, with Mrs. Simpson, who was a drinking acquaintance. Catherine Miller, the younger woman, was a drinking pal of Mrs. Simpson. So Mone, when he was questioned by police, because they knew that was the last movements of Mrs. Simpson and Mrs. Miller, left the flat to get supplies. Now, when they spoke to his friend, Stuart Hutton, he said the same thing. He'd left to get supplies, but he felt like there was a strange atmosphere in the flat and he didn't want to go back, so he decided to go out and spend the money he'd been given for the supplies on betting instead. And he could prove that is what he did because he still had the betting slips and he won some money. Sonny's son, Robert, first went to prison. He presented his father with his ring, saying he wouldn't be allowed to wear it in prison, so he wore this ring with pride and was really pleased with this ring of his son's. So Mone happened to be wearing this ring on the night that the women were murdered, and there was a very noticeable mark in Aunt Agnes Waugh's face, which left an imprint of this ring. So I think they took a sample of that skin and compared it to his ring. Weeks before that, he had been fined £10 for breach of the peace. Court. He denied the charges. The 8 witnesses were cited by the Crown. It took 75 minutes to reach his verdict, and Mone was sentenced to life imprisonment in June 1979. Lord Robertson, court said, "You have been convicted of what I can only describe as a terrible crime," and recommended that Sonny Mone should serve at least 15 years before he would be eligible for parole, which doesn't sound a lot for murdering 3 women. So Sonny, being a bit of a smart aleck, said, "Would you mind backdating it, eh?" Part of the reason he wanted to kill these 3 women was to go to prison, and he had this romantic idea that he'd be in prison with his son and he'd be able to meet his beloved son again. But he ended up not being in the same prison as him. He ended up being in a prison called Craig Inch's prison, where he took up yoga and impressed his fellow inmates by doing shoulder pull-ups. So in May 1981, Robert Mone, Sonny Mone's son, rooftop protest over his conditions at HMP Perth. In 1983, Sonny, his father, met a violent end in January 1983 during a tea break when Anthony John Curry, aged 39 and carrying 2 knives, stabbed him. And I know Anthony, I don't know whether this is mitigation or whether he's just saying what he thought. Maybe he had a whole life tariff and he didn't care about serving anymore. But basically he said Sonny Mone was the most obnoxious person he'd ever come across. And I know he wasn't very well liked in prison. People didn't really like even amongst criminals, there's a code of conduct in as much as rapists, paedophiles, women murderers, sexual murderers, or particularly of women, are not well liked in prison and often targeted to end in prison at the hands of this Anthony John Curry. But in 1995, Robert Mone had 6 months added to his sentence for assaulting a fellow prisoner. In 2002, Robert Mone's sentence was reduced to 25 years under the European Convention on Human Rights. And in 2007, Robert Mone was allowed out on day release. Survivors of the 1967 incident campaigned against and said he should never be released for what he did. And politicians Jim McGovern and David McLetchie decreed that he should never be released, with McLetchie saying that the European Court of Human Rights had crippled the justice system. And I think that might have been a human rights bill, or not human rights bill, European Commission for Human Rights. It might be one of the reasons that people have voted for Brexit, because it's a bit too far reaching. I think Mone was sent back to the high security in Glenorchy prison in 2008, following fears that he was planning another escape. Now, 2013, if you remember Thomas McCulloch, he was the lover of Mone in the 70s when they did that escape, and Thomas McCulloch brutally murdered 3 people, one of them with the help of Mone, using a cleaver, an axe, knives, I think that was it, and chopped off the ears of 2 people, 2 of the ears of one of his victims. What was an ear up for each one? I can't remember. I think it was 2 ears off one victim. Anyway, he was released in 2013. I don't know what I feel about that. I don't know, I suppose he was a good prisoner and they felt like he served his time. I don't know. I believe he is now married and has left a quiet, blameless life since. So as for Robert Mone, he's remained in Glenorchy. And while imprisoned, he has studied law and philosophy and transcribed books into Braille. And as things stand now, he is currently Scotland's longest serving prisoner. So that's the end of that gruesome tale. I hope you've found this case interesting. I've been Anne-Marie, and please like and subscribe if you like my content. And that's it for me. See you soon. Bye. Object